Yo, what is going on, guys? Welcome back to another video. So it's Tuesday. It's time for a tier list Tuesday. Every single Tuesday on this channel, we do a goddamn tier list. And last week, I foreshadowed what this week's tier list was going to be, considering last week was tier listing every single team's forward core, post free agency, post a bunch of trades. Now we got the defense core. And honestly, there might have been even more movement in the defense market when looking at top guys like Brady Shea, Brandon Montour, Nikita Zadorov, switching teams on top of a Jacob Chikrin trade. So some defense cores have rapidly, massively changed this offseason. So now it is time to tier list them. Let's pull up our tier lists, sticking to the basics. Great, good, solid, and meh. I'm doing this on my laptop, not my normal desktop. I'm moving for like 5 weeks over to Miami, so we're gonna have to it's gonna be a little bit weird. You're gonna see me looking down a lot. But up first, we have the Anaheim Ducks, and when looking at the Anaheim Ducks, I think they have a very good defense core future. But right now, I'm going to put it in meh. When looking at it, Pavel Michikov, extremely promising. Olin Zellweger, I think, is going to have a very good rookie year. And Brad Kogutis is a very good defensive defenseman. Cam Fowler, not really a legit number one. And so there's some other holes in this defense core. Jackson Lacombe, not quite a stud at the NHL level. So I don't think it's that bad. I think it has the potential to definitely be solid this season. But right now, I'm going to put it in meh. The Boston Bruins, I'm going to put it in great. They're just big, they're mean, and they're defensemen. They focus mainly on defense when looking at their defense core. There's not some liability offensive defensemen. Their top guys can do it at a high level. I think Hampus Lindholm's going to have a big bounce back season. The dude finished fourth in Norris voting back in 2022, 2023. Charlie McAvoy, fully healthy, is a no doubt top 10 guy. Nikita Zadorov's a very solid ad, although I don't love him on that contract. When looking at it, he's going to be worth $5 million. He's going to beat the shit out of people next season. Brendan Carlo, very, very good defenseman that has proven himself in recent years. They're just a very solid unit overall, and they lost like Matt Grzelcyk, but he was honestly pretty bad for them this season. So I think the Boston Bruins have definitely earned a spot in great after their moves this offseason. The Buffalo Sabres, the left side is like good, maybe even borderline great when looking at Rasmus Dahlin, Owen Power, and Bowen Byram. It's maybe the best top three left-handed defensemen in the NHL. But the right side is just so questionable for me. Connor Clifton, Matthias Samuelsson, Henry Yukaharu. I think I pronounced that right. But it's just very disappointing. It's just such a bipolar left side, right side kind of defense core. So they have a lot of offensive potential. They're pretty solid defensively, but I think overall it just makes for a pretty solid group. It's really nothing special. The Calgary Flames, if you were going with like best defenseman 1-2 duos in the NHL, they could arguably be great. But beyond Rasmus Anderson and I almost said Noah Hannafin, besides Rasmus Anderson and Mackenzie Weegar, it's pretty horrendous. It is pretty horrendous heading into next season. They're going to need a guy like Kevin Ball to probably play 21 minutes a night. It's not good. It is not good. The Russian defenseman that they got in the Vegas Golden Knights trade for Hannafin, that guy's probably going to have to play pretty serious minutes. So in looking at Calgary next season, they got some solid defenseman prospects. Zane Perrick and Hunter Brustevich are going to be there in a couple years. But in the meantime, they're gonna be leaving Dustin Wolf. He might have a rough rookie year just because their defense core is not very good. The Carolina Hurricanes, even though that they lost Brett Pesce and Brady Shea, I still think it's a great defense core. I really like the ads of Sean Walker and Shane Gothenburg, especially at their respective cap hits. Those are very solid deals, both in like the mid 3 millions. They still have one of the best pairs point blank when looking at Brett Burns and Jacob Slavin. On top of that third pair, or maybe now it's going to be the second pair, but Jalen Chatfield and Dmitry Orlov. I know Dmitry Orlov makes $7.8 million. That's not a good deal, but Dmitry Orlov and Jalen Chatfield still is a very effective pair, and especially with Rod Brindamore coaching them, I still think that it is a very, very solid defensive unit. They maybe don't offer a ton of offense outside of, say, or Gothenburg is actually going to help that offense a lot, but defensively, they are very good. And Shane Gothenburg is also familiar with the system, which is important. There's not going to be a massive learning curve considering he got traded there at the 2023 trade deadline. The Chicago Blackhawks, I'm going to put them in solid. Not solid. I'm going to put them in meh. My bad. I've switched my tiers right there. I'm going to put them in meh. They brought in some veteran guys. If TJ Brody can be like the guy that he was on the first 3 years with the Toronto Maple Leafs, that's a very solid ad. If he's the guy that he was this year, it's probably still an upgrade over whoever they had last year. But when looking at it, they also brought in a veteran like Alec Martinez. Seth Jones is massively overpaid, but he's probably still a solid second pair guy on most teams. He just has been having to play 25 minutes a night in recent memory. Kevin Korchinski, I think, is going to take another step. Very, very good offensively, even in his rookie year. Not a ton of points, but his play driving numbers were impressive, and I think he's going to be better defensively this season, on top of Alex Vlasic being a very promising defensive defenseman going forward. They locked him up on like a 6-year deal at what, like $4 million. So I think they're actually going to be a pretty meh unit. They're definitely out of the bottom 3 in the NHL. The Colorado Avalanche, good. Probably the best pair I would predict them to be, although Matthias Ekholm and Evan Bouchard probably were the best pair in hockey last year. If I were to bet on a pair being the best pair this season, it would be Cale Makar and Devon Toews. Sam Girard, been up and down, entered player assistance. I think a fully healthy, his mind's the off-ice stuff not bothering him like it has in prior years. Hopefully he has overcome those problems. He can be very effective for them. Josh Manson's a perfectly fine second pair guy, and I really do like the ads of Calvin DeHaan, a guy that I watched for a long time in the New York Islanders, on top of blanking on his name. Eric Brandstrom was a very solid, cheap, low-risk, high-reward kind of pickup for them, so I think they're going to have a good defense core. I could maybe even argue for great, considering they're the best defenseman, and probably another top 15 defenseman. The Columbus Blue Jackets, I'm going to go with meh. It was pretty bad last year, and especially when Zach Werenski got hurt in the 2022 season, it was the worst defense core point blank. But when looking at Columbus this season, if Zach Werenski can stay healthy, he has been hurt multiple times in recent memory. If David Jiricek can actually stay at the NHL level and really show that he is an NHL top 4 defenseman, I think he's more than capable of doing that. On top of already having established guys like Damon Severson, who's a good offensive defenseman. Ivan Provorov actually was pretty solid his first season in Columbus. I know it didn't translate to a ton of wins, but compared to his last couple of years in Philadelphia, he was much better. So I would say that they're out of the bad tier. You're going to see there's not going to be a lot of teams in the bad tier or in the great tier, even though I already have 2 teams up there. There's going to be a lot in meh, good, and solid probably in this tier list. The Dallas Stars, if they spent their money better than giving Ilya Lyubushkin and Matt Dumba like a combined $7 million, they probably would be in great, but now I'm going to go with good. It's really like a 3-man defense core heading into next season. When looking at Miro Heiskanen and Thomas Harley, they might honestly have to split up just because they don't have a ton of depth, but if they do play together, top 3 pair in the NHL. On top of Esa Lindell is just Mr. Reliable on that second pair, but Lyubushkin, Dumba, Nils Lundqvist is probably going to yet again crack the defense core. I'm a little bit disappointed. It's definitely the weak link of this Dallas team, but it's still very good. That just goes to show how good of a team Dallas is, that their weak point is still in good. The Detroit Red Wings, I might get shit for this. I do think Moritz Seider is a very good player, but outside of this defense core sucks. Like it just sucks when looking at guys like Justin Hull. They bring in Eric Gustafsson actually was a decent pickup, but when looking at other guys like Jeff Petrie, Oli Mata, Ben Sherratt, those guys are going to be playing serious minutes within your defense core. It's Moritz Seider, and then it just falls off a cliff, and they still might potentially get Jacob Trouba down the line. That is honestly an upgrade, even though I don't think that he's that good of a player. It is shaping up to be a pretty horrendous defense core. People say I hate the Wings. I don't think this is a biased take to say that the Wings have one of the worst defense cores in the NHL. The Edmonton Oilers, good. I still don't like CC and Darnell Nurse being in your defense core, but when you have one of the best pairs in the NHL, on top of, I think, Brett Kulak's very underrated defenseman, I think they're going to be a solid group overall. Either in solid or good, I would give them the edge in good. Their underlying numbers are actually pretty solid. I think people just look at Darnell Nurse and Cody Ceci and think that their overall core is garbage, when outside of that, it's actually pretty good. The Florida Panthers are interesting. Dude, this is another toss-up. I am going to go. They obviously lost Brandon Montour, which is a big loss. I'm not that big on Aaron Ekblad, but Gustav Forsling is a stud. I'm gonna give them the benefit of the doubt. I'm gonna put them in good. I'm sure Paul Maurice is gonna coach them up. I really like the pickups of a Nate Schmidt, dirt cheap, $800K. He's not worth $5.9 million. The Winnipeg Jets were well within their rights for buying out his contract at that cap hit, but at a league veteran minimum, that is a steal. I think Adam Boquist could potentially bounce back on top of the guys that they are returning. Aaron Ekblad needs to really step up without Brandon Montour there, but I think that he's more than capable of doing so. So the LA Kings have a good, solid defense core. It's definitely the strength of this. I gotta stop saying good and then solid. They have a good defense core when looking at guys like Drew Doughty, Mikey Anderson. Jordan Spence is an exciting young guy that I'm really looking forward to see next season. Brant Clark is probably finally going to crack the lineup. Vladislav Gavrikov has been one of the most underrated defensemen since he arrived in Los Angeles. He got a shit ton of hate because in Columbus, he was pegged as their number 1 guy when Werenski was down. He's not a number 1 guy on the worst team in the NHL. He's more of a second pair guy. I could argue I could argue for the LA Kings being in great. I'm not going to lie. I don't like the rest of their team. I don't like their goalie tandem. I think their forward core is disappointing, but I could argue that the LA Kings have a great defense core. The Minnesota Wild, though, I am going to go with good. The three-headed monster of Jared Spurgeon, if he's healthy this season, he's a top 30 defenseman for me. Brock Faber really exploded this season. Brodin is still one of the best defensive defensemen. Jake Middleton has really proven himself on that Minnesota team. I'm not going to act like he's like a stud second pair guy, but he's a okay second pair guy, maybe even maybe more so a high third pair guy. The third pair isn't very good heading into next season, but I think the top four and especially their top three is going to be very good and will carry them to an overall good grade. When looking at the Montreal Canadiens, I think they're going to be able to generate a lot of offense from their blue line from guys like Mike Matheson and Lane Hudson. I do have some concerns in terms of their overall defensive capabilities when looking at guys like Mike Matheson, and I don't know how Lane Hudson, his first season in the NHL, is going to defend. Caden Cooley, I think, is going to be a very solid top four defense. Probably already is, especially defensively. It's getting there. It's going to be solid next year once David Reinbacher comes out. Then it's eventually going to be good, and then it's probably going to eventually be great when it's all said and done. But right now, I do think it is kind of a meh defense core. The Nashville Predators, they brought in Brady Shea. Last year, it was Roman Josi and Ryan McDonough really running the show. This year, it's going to be Brady Shea and Roman Josi. I don't really love the pieces outside of those two, so I'm just going to go with the solid. I am taking way too long with this. I haven't even ran through like half the goddamn teams. The New Jersey Devils, I am going to put in good, especially after the ads that they made. Dougie Hamilton, Brendan Dillon, Brett Pesci. Luke Hughes is going to be massive in terms of taking yet another step. Simone Nemec, if he takes another step. I could argue that the New Jersey Devils also should be in great when looking at it. If Nemec and Luke Hughes both take steps, I think they're set up to be a very, very good defensive core this season. My New York Islanders, solid. It's really going to come down to Pelican Polak. We don't need them to be 2021, 2020 versions of themselves when they were one of the best, especially defensively, pairs in the NHL. We just need them to be a solid second pair. So when looking at that, Scott Mayfield, I'm praying on a bounce back here. I don't think it's going to happen, but Dobson and Romanov have really proved themselves as a legit top pair in the NHL. So as a result, I'm going to put them in solid. The New York Rangers, I'm also going to put in solid. I don't think I'm biased for this. Adam Fox is fantastic. He's my second best defenseman in the NHL. But when looking at guys like Ryan Lindgren, had a little bit of a down year, especially defensively last year. Jacob Trouba continues to fall off. Keandre Miller, still a very promising guy at 24 years old, but didn't really take that next step. I like Braden Schneider a lot, and Zach Jones is going to be interesting in that third pair spot. But I think right now it's solid. I love their goaltending. I really like their forward core, but the defense core is more so just solid. The Ottawa Senators, yeah, I got to go meh. I like Jake Sanderson and Thomas Chabot a lot. I think Nick Jensen is going to be effective, especially because he's actually a right shot defense instead of Jacob Chikrin playing in that role. But still, it's pretty disappointing. I can't say I'm too big of a fan of it. The Philadelphia Flyers, also pretty solid. If a guy like Cam York takes a big step this season, maybe you could bump them up to solid. Maybe Torts, like he did last year, coaches them to a solid level. But in terms of the talent on the roster, I think it's just solid. Pittsburgh Penguins, I'm going to go with solid. Erik Karlsson was actually pretty solid last year. The points weren't quite there compared to when he had 101, 102, but he was actually better defensively and still generating a ton of even strength offense. Chris Letang did fall off a little bit. Pettersson, pretty solid top four defenseman. I think you probably could bump them down into meh, but I'm going to put them at solid. I think they're going to have an overall okay year. The San Jose Sharks, they're in the bad. They're the worst defense core, even after adding Jake Wallman, Mario Ferraro. There's really not much beyond that. Sam Dickinson's still 1 to 2 years away. It's one of the worst defense cores. The Seattle Kraken, I'm going to go with solid. I like the Brandon Montour deal in the short term. I don't love giving him 7 years at 29 years old, but he's definitely going to add some offensive juice to that. Vince Dunn's really proved himself as a legit number one. And when looking at other guys like Adam Larson, I like on the defensive end. And Jamie Oleksiak has been very good for them ever since that he signed there. So I think they actually have a solid defense core now. It's not just Vince Dunn creating all the offense for the Seattle Kraken. Next up, the St. Louis Blues. Meh. When looking at it, Colton Parayko still a pretty damn good defenseman. Justin Falk, solid. Torrey Krug has fallen off a cliff. straight up bad. Nick Leddy's not what he used to be when he was playing with my New York Islanders. So they're a pretty shallow group. They're not quite as bad as those bottom three, but still pretty disappointing. Tampa Bay Lightning. The Tampa Bay Lightning, I'm going to put them in solid. They lost Mikhail Sergachev, but I do like bringing in Ryan McDonough, more so of a defensive guy. I think JJ Moser is going to be a solid piece for them. Victor Hedman doesn't play a lot of defense anymore. He's no longer a top 10 defenseman for me. I know you guys are going to kill me for that, but he's one of the worst defensemen now in the NHL. So in looking at it, I think the Tampa Bay Lightning deserve a spot in solid. The Toronto Maple Leafs, I think that they improved enough to go into solid. TJ Brody, it was time to kind of cut that guy loose. He was starting to regress. Chris Tanev, I think, is going to be a high-level defenseman for them. And I think OEL is going to bring some puck moving from the blue line that they severely lacked last year in the playoffs. So although I don't love those deals, I said it 9,000 times, I don't love those deals long-term. Next year, they are going to improve the defense score by a decent amount. The Utah Hockey Club, I think that they improved in pretty massive ways in terms of acquiring John Marino and Mikhail Sergachev. I think they're going to be a pretty solid defense core alongside guys like Sean Durzi next season. The Vancouver Canucks, I'm going to put them in good. They got one of the best pairs in the NHL. Although they lost Nikita Zadorov, I think it was probably the right move in terms of not paying him that much. But I would be confident if I was a Canucks fan heading into the season with their defense core. The Vegas Golden Knights. I think that they are worthy of the great tier when looking at their three-headed monster is one of the most impressive. Noah Hannafin, Shea Theodore, Alex Pietrangelo, on top of having guys like Zach Whitecloud that I'm a big fan of. So when looking at them, I think they've assembled a great defense core. The forward core shallow. The goaltending outside of Adin Hill, if he can stay healthy, it's going to be okay. If not, it can go to shit. But I think the defense core is going to be the backbone of this team. Washington Capitals, good, man. They acquired a legit good second pair, playoff level second pair this season in terms of Jacob Chikrin and Matt Roy, one through trade, one through free agency. They already have guys like Martin Feravari, Rasmus Sandin, a little bit disappointing this season, but I still think he has some potential. And John Carlson still is a 60-ish point top pair, probably. Maybe not a legit number one. Actually, a low-end number one offensive defenseman for the Washington Capitals. I'm actually pretty impressed with their defense score this season. And then lastly, the Winnipeg Jets. Whoops, let me drag them across. I'm going to put them in... They're kind of meh, I'm not going to lie. Yeah, I'm going to put them in meh. They lost Brendan Dillon. Josh Morrissey is a stud, but he's not going to have a ton of help heading into next season, so I'm actually just going to put him in meh. I'm not a big fan of the Minnesota Wild's defense core, but here's the list. Let me know in the comments, what do you think? This was kind of a shit show because, again, I'm recording this on my laptop, but I'm going to be moving into this new place. We're going to have a nice studio there, and I'll be seeing the next one.